is wild. Hi, everybody. Thank you for stopping by the cooking tent. I am going to be, in 30 minutes, making start to finish one of the dishes from my column, which is a tomato poached cod with chili oil and herbs. I was like, what can I do realistically in 30 minutes? Because the like movie magic swapping thing, I'm like, I don't know what that's going to be like. So this I know for a fact can be done in start to finish. As I do recipes like on video or demos, I don't really follow the recipe. So if it looks like in the recipe you call for 2 cloves of garlic and this is 1, like, there's a recipe, it exists online, you can find it there. This recipe became really popular this year, which was extremely surprising to me because it's fish, and I feel like people don't love cooking fish at home, or they're afraid to cook fish at home, or they don't know how, or it's just generally intimidating. It's like definitely a harder sell than, say, a boneless, skinless chicken breast or a pasta dish, which will almost always do well. So it was a bit of a gamble, but I'm extremely pleasantly surprised that people were actually cooking it. So if that's my greatest claim to fame, that I got people to cook fish on a Tuesday, I will take it. The nice thing about this dish is that it is like a one skillet situation, which is kind of my MO generally speaking. I'm not a big fan of pots and pans and having to wash a million dishes because I don't have a dishwasher. I am the dishwasher. And so it's important for me that I feel like I'm spending my time cooking and eating and not washing things. So one skillet is great. And I think this dish was sort of engineered backwards, where I really just wanted an excuse to eat chili oil. Where are my knives? Sorry, first time here. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I really just wanted to reverse engineer a way that I could eat chili oil in like an obscene amount. And so I was like, well, I would eat it on fish. And I feel like doing it with fish is a really good way to kind of convince people that fish can be super, super flavorful when cooked in the right circumstances, and that's by showering it with chili oil and crispy shallots. So I feel like this is a technique that you can employ sort of in any way. You can use it with chicken breasts, or you can also use it with fish, but starting your cooking process by making an oil and then using some of that oil to garnish and then also cook the rest of your stuff in. So I'm going to make a very quick, breezy, extremely simplified version of chili oil, which is basically starting with fried shallots. So it's like making a chili oil with shallot oil. It's a lot of things. It sounds more complicated than it is, but I promise it's not. And fried shallots are something that if I had on hand at all times, I would absolutely eat with wild abandon because I find them impossibly delicious. It's like a better version of the French's onions that you put on a green bean casserole. I would eat those too. It's not like an either-or situation, but this is like a nice homemade version, I guess. And I think the first time I had them was probably in like a Vietnamese restaurant or something. And when I was in Vietnam, they are everywhere. And the food is already fantastic and perfect. And then add fried shallots to everything, and it's like phenomenal. And when frying shallots, you don't start in a hot pan with hot oil. You start with a cold pan, cold oil, add the shallots. The reason being, shallots have a lot of water in them. That's not going to work. They have a lot of water in them. And people are like, your food's really good. I'm like, it's olive oil. And if you want your food to taste good too, you should be using more olive oil. But yeah, so shallots have a lot of water in them, and if you were to drop these into a pan of just hot oil, what'll happen is they'll crisp on the outside, but the inside will stay kind of moist, full of moisture, and it'll be kind of soggy and flabby. When you start it from the beginning in cold oil, good thing this is not a flame. Induction burners, what a miracle. When you start with cold, they sort of start to fry from the inside out. So what you get is a shallot that stays crispy for like all of eternity. And that's how long I want it to stay crispy for. So while that is happening, I'll prep the rest of my ingredients, garlic, tomatoes. The nice thing also about this dish is that it's like 7 ingredients maybe, including salt and pepper, and it tastes super, super complex. And that's because we're using ingredients like, shallots and a little bit of fish sauce, and tomatoes, which automatically have a ton of flavor. But I think the reason this was so successful is because people couldn't believe at how fast it was and how much it tasted like it took forever. So that's kind of my MO. I'm trying to trick people into thinking that they've cooked longer than they have. And for the shred shallots, it'll be like a medium-high heat situation. You don't want to like blast the heat because then again they'll burn before they're actually able to cook through. They're like, do you want your garlic peeled on stage? I was like, no, I got it. 5 hours later, I'm still peeling the garlic. I was like, I can do it all, start to finish. And I can. There's a million ways to peel cloves of garlic, and I feel like everybody's grandma or aunt has a secret way. But my favorite way is to just smash it with a knife. But you can also shake it in a bowl, or I don't know. There was that crazy garlic trick on the internet. They took like a needle out of the clove. Remember that? No? Internet? Anyone heard of it? No. Look it up. It's pretty cool. It was like when you're making kimchi and you need like 50,000 cloves. So fried shallots are happening. And for this, I'm not going to really fuss over them. I just want to make sure that they're all kind of getting equal attention. And whether or not you're doing this in a pot, why is this taking me so long? Whether you're doing this in a pot or a skillet, I kind of like a skillet for this because A, I'm going to cook the fish in a skillet. But if I were making a batch of crispy shallots, you could also do this in a pot. But the nice thing about the skillet is that they all lay flat. In a pot, they're going to crowd and they're going to clump together, and they're not going to keep their nice, like, beautiful ring shape. You know what? I'm going to do 3 because we only have so much time, and I've taken 5 hours to peel this garlic. And so I think in the recipe, the garlic and the shallots may be added together, but because the garlic, I'm not looking for that super, super toasty golden brown color. I'm more just looking to take the raw edge off. I can kind of add them halfway through the process as these start happening. And the chili part of the chili oil comes in sort of towards the end because using chili flakes is great, but they are delicate and they will burn faster than you think. I'm using a fish spatula because it's my favorite kitchen tool. I use it the way most people use spatulas or wooden spoons. I use it to stir things. I use it to lift pieces of fish out of the skillet. I use it to lift vegetables off of a sheet pan. I am nothing without my fish spatula. There was a week where I couldn't find it because it fell behind my stove, and I was like, well, I have to get a new job. I can no longer do anything properly anymore. What am I going to do? I found it. After something else fell behind there, and I was like, oh, I bet that's where all of my tools are. It was like a graveyard of everything I've ever lost in the kitchen. A lot of people like to take this little stemmy part off of a tomato. I will if the tomatoes aren't excellent, but I don't worry about anything else here. Like, I'm not going to core the tomato. I'm just, honestly, if I weren't up here with you guys, I'd probably just leave this part in too. But I just want to show you that that's how I would do it. But that's why I like, a smaller, sweeter tomato is not going to have the same problem of like a, watery, sort of harder center. But it is not tomato season. The good news is that this recipe can be made with any tomato from any season because that's how good the rest of the sauce is. I was having a talk earlier with Sam and Melissa about developing recipes, and the topic of ingredients came up about like where do you shop, like how do you test your recipes, what do you like to do? And I always say that for whatever recipe I'm developing, whether it's for the Times or for any of my books, that I like to start with the lowest common denominator and shop. I'm not going to say I seek out bad ingredients, but I want to make sure that even with a subpar tomato, something is going to work and taste good. Because anyone can make a beautiful peak season tomato taste delicious, but it's a lot harder to make something taste good when you're working with something either out of season or you don't have access to it or whatever. There's a lot of reasons that you wouldn't be able to find something. So that way, if you are using really good tomatoes, what a pleasant surprise, because it's going to taste even better than I had intended. And I feel like this is a really good example. This recipe was published in the summer with the intention of using nicer tomatoes, but again, it's like I feel confident that this will taste excellent even if that's not the case, which, not gonna lie, it's not the case. These tomatoes are just okay. But that's fine, because fish sauce is here. Also, when I was writing this recipe, I realized I was asking people to seek out, a delicate, mild, sort of meaty fish that doesn't have a fishy flavor, mild in texture and whatever. And then I'm having you add fish sauce to the sauce. And someone that was testing it was like, oh, why am I adding fish sauce if you don't want me to add a fishy fish? I was like, good question. Fish sauce to me is not a fish flavor. It's a salty flavor. It's like an umami flavor, a word that I generally hate, but I'm using it because there's no other word. It adds like a rich meatiness to it, and I think that is sort of the secret that contributes to the richness of this dish and why it tastes more complex than it is. These are almost done, which is great news. And they smell very good. Also, when you're frying shallots, it's the kind of thing where you really want to make sure that you're taking them off the heat, almost like al dente is the best way I could describe it, because they will continue to kind of cook after you've removed them from the oil. So I watch them really closely at this point, and right as they start turning like the proper shade of golden brown, that's when I take them off. Do we have paper towels up here? Paper towels? We have everything down here. Oh, down further on the stage. Oh, found them. Great, thank you. Sorry. They have done everything they can to show me exactly where everything is, and I'm like, yeah, I got it. And surely here I am asking where everything is. Cool. So because this is almost done, actually maybe I add the garlic with the tomatoes in the other, whatever, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I'm gonna add the chili flake now. And I'm adding it just long enough so that it kind of blooms in the oil. Chili flake on its own without toasting it kind of is a little, it can have, like depending on how old it is, it can have like a stale kind of lackluster flavor. So like any spice, you want to toast it in the oil first. But because it is delicate, like I mentioned, it does like to burn and take on kind of a bitter flavor. So just like a few minutes, like a minute or two in here. And so I'm gonna take these off. And I will drain them on a paper towel just to get rid of any excess oil, because I hate oil. I would, God forbid there be excess. That's just to kind of encourage them to stay crispy. And so this is what we'll use to sprinkle on top of the fish. The fish that I'm going to use is a soft texture, and because there's no skin, it's a boneless, skinless fillet, there's no crispiness. There's no like shattering skin, and I am a huge fan of crispy texture in general. It's the only thing I care about when I'm eating. I don't like soft foods. I don't think you should puree your soup. And I have a lot of thoughts about lack of texture. And so if I am gonna cook a soft fillet of fish or something like this, I always wanna make sure that I'm garnishing it with something that's gonna return that texture back. Okay, so I'm gonna take out some of this oil. Oh, that's gonna, whatever. I think I do something different in the recipe, I'm realizing now. I haven't made this in a while. But again, it doesn't really matter. So you're taking some of the oil, and that's gonna finish the dish. And some of this oil I'm gonna use to cook our tomatoes. And I think originally I have you cooking the tomatoes with the garlic. This is my cooking show today. I could do what I want. But I don't follow directions well, especially my own. But I feel a little less bad breaking my own rules. The shallots should definitely get salted when they come off. As they cool, they lose a little bit of that moisture, and so when you salt them, the salt just kind of falls off of them. So doing it right away, like with any fried food, you want to do it sooner rather than later. Okay, so these are going to cook down. And this you can kind of turn up the heat a little bit. This music is really making me feel extremely sassy up here. Never have I ever had a soundtrack. Normally it's like Casey Musgraves exclusively for hours on end. So yeah, you can use cherry tomatoes for this. there's really not a tomato that I wouldn't use. I think that people have a lot of opinions about what tomatoes you should use for which things, and I think that it matters if, like, say, you're canning a tomato. I wouldn't can a heirloom tomato, but pasta sauce, tomato sauce, this tomato broth for this fish, you can kind of use whatever you want. I truly believe that. They're all gonna taste good, even the bad tomatoes. Not that this is a bad tomato, but you know what I mean. It's October, what do you want, you know? I'm from found you. I'm from California, where I like to pretend that produce is perfect all the time, but even in California, it's challenging to find good tomatoes year-round. People in California will tell you that they exist. They don't. You're not missing anything. California is just okay. Don't tell my parents. They think I'm still moving back one day. I'm not. While those cook, I'll talk to you guys about fish, which, again, just absolutely flabbergasted that a recipe became so successful. That is a fish recipe. And when I say successful, it's successful by my own metric system, which is how many people tag me in a photo. But it's actually a really good way for me to see what people are cooking. All right, so anything like a fluke or a flounder or a cod or a halibut, to me, while they're all very different fish and once cooked have different textures, they have something in common, which is that their flavors are mild, they cook relatively quickly, and even if you're not that into fish, you're probably gonna enjoy it. Just because it's a pretty, you're like, what does this taste like? And you're like, I don't know. It's not like salmon or mackerel or a fatty, oily fish, which tends to have a really assertive flavor. So I like to say that this recipe is interchangeable with pretty much anything. Oh, I thought they were trying to tell me something. They're not. So depending on what you can find. And I think fish is something that I'm also really sensitive to because it's not an easily obtained ingredient. Like, you really have to want it to cook it. And if you live in a place like New York, you're like, oh, I'll just stop by the whatever on my way home. But a lot of people don't know where to even start. Or like, is this place okay to buy fish? And I feel like if you have to ask yourself, is this fish okay? It might not be. So I think trying to seek out a place that you know the fish is coming from a good source, that it's fresh, that it's busy, so there's a high turnover. That's all really, really important. But if the recipe calls for cod and you can only find fluke or flounder or it's worked with tilapia, then I want you to feel empowered to use that fish. Like, this doesn't have to be made with cod. I'm gonna put that string right there. Okay. And so, like everything with every step of the way, I'm gonna season this fish with salt and pepper. And instead of cooking this in one large piece, just because I don't know what kind of skillet you're working with, what size, it's nice to portion them. And that is also nice because when you are serving the fish, you know, okay, I'm gonna get 4 portions out of this or 5 portions out of this. For fish, I think like a typical serving size is like anywhere from 4 to 6 ounces, depending. Thicker fish is nice for me personally because I can fit them all in the skillet. Flounder and fluke and those thinner fishes, they take up a lot of space, so you can kind of only fit like 2 or 3 in at a time, but the thicker pieces, they weigh the same. It's the same portion. They just all tend to fit. I've never talked about fish so much in my life for an extended period of time for so many people. So the more you know about fish. And people ask me, like, if you live in New York, where do you buy fish? I live near a place called Mermaid's Garden, which is in Prospect Heights in Brooklyn. They have great fish, but that's kind of like if I'm just cooking for myself or my family or my friends. I don't cook for my family. They live in California. I guess that's like a thing you say. That was weird, sorry. But when I'm recipe testing, like I said, I really do like to shop where people are shopping and going to Whole Foods and going to Seatown and going to Brooklyn Fair and saying, like, what do you have available? Like, what's around? Because I don't want to call for ingredients that you guys can't find, because then nobody would cook the recipes. So, and I would hate that. So, all right, this is happening. If you start with a smaller tomato, then this is going to happen a little bit quicker. But it's also like if you're starting with an impossibly juicy tomato or like fall apart tomato. That's why, like, in the summer, this is a really good dish to use, like if you go to the farmer's market and you're like, do you have any like ugly tomatoes or tomatoes that are almost on the verge of becoming impossibly ripe? This is a really good dish to use it because you're cooking it down into nothing. They don't need to be perfect. It's not like a tomato salad. Wow. Really, this induction burner means business. And if you're finding that the tomatoes are maybe taking longer than you want to break down, and you're running out of things to talk about with tomatoes, you can always you can always kind of encourage them to break down by giving them a smush with your fish spatula or a wooden spoon. For this also, like, I'm not looking to cook these down into a puree. I really do want to have those like bits of chunks of tomatoes. So I really just kind of want to encourage the pulpiness to come out, but I'm not looking for tomato sauce. I am going to add water to this, which is going to make the broth, and that's going to encourage them to cook down even further. But for me, this stage here is kind of about concentrating the sugars in the tomatoes. If you boil a tomato and drink that water, it's not going to be very good. But if you cook a tomato in chili oil, cook it down, get its juices flowing, caramelize the sugars, and then you add water, it's going to be really good. And then you're going to cook a fish in it, and it's going to be awesome. All right, now is the time I will add water. I'm going to use this fancy pitcher, even though this is for me to drink. All right, and I'm going to just bring this back up to a simmer. And then I'm going to add the fish sauce. So the fish sauce is like an ingredient that I use sort of in the way that I use anchovies, which is to say often and with wild abandon. And it really does make things taste better. And one of the more popular questions I got was, can I make this without fish sauce? And almost every time I would try to respond, have you made it with fish sauce? And they say, no, well, I don't like fish sauce. And I was like, all right, well, make it with fish sauce, try it, and then tell me you don't like fish sauce. And nobody ever came back and was like, you're right, I don't like fish, or you're wrong, I don't like fish sauce, because guess what? You can't really taste the fish sauce. It's really just to add, a more nuanced flavor to this tomato sauce, which comes together pretty quickly with very few ingredients. So I feel like giving that a shot, I feel like half of my job is trying to convince people to like an ingredient they think they don't like. But it's like a personal mission. I really like that process. A lot of people claiming they don't like olives lately. I don't buy it. I feel like you gotta try the right olive. Not olives are the same. Same thing with fish sauce. Not all fish sauce is the same. Different brands have different levels of quality. And I feel like you should ask somebody who you respect or trust, where do you get your fish sauce? What's your favorite brand? And there's more articles than there need to be about fish sauce on the internet, so no shortage of information. But you want to look for one that has as few ingredients as possible. So like just anchovies and salt, pretty much. And could you use anchovies here instead of fish sauce? Absolutely. Would I recommend it? Definitely. This is sort of like I was being fatigued with my own infatuation with anchovies, so I was like, I know, I'll use fish sauce instead. That will fool them into thinking I like more things than I do. Okay, so this tomato sauce broth sitch is happening. The tomatoes I'm, kind of forcing to break down a little bit more, just because, again, they're a larger tomato. They're a little past their prime tomato. But again, it's fine. If you wanted to, at any point in this, you could also add other flavors like crushed spices. Turmeric would be really good in this, crushed fennel seed. This is sort of a really good basic blank canvas to start on. Start with. Bless you. Okay, so this is almost ready. I'm going to taste it because once I add the fish, I don't really want to be adding more seasoning. It's kind of like the way you want to cook your pasta in salted water. You want to cook your fish in the most flavorful liquid possible. So this should be good enough to serve on its own if you wanted to. So I'm going to taste it with a spoon. That is under this drawer right here. Thank you. Thank God they're here, honestly. That is good. It needs salt. I feel like when people watch me cook, the thing that they're most surprised about is how much salt I add. But food needs salt. And I think that as soon as you kind of understand how much kosher salt you're actually using when you're cooking and how much your food actually needs to taste good, it's not about being salty, it's about bringing flavor into your life. It's about things tasting good. So I don't believe food should ever be salty unless that's something that I'm going for specifically, which sometimes it is. But I think that that is sort of like the key to unlocking most success. Okay, I am going to add my fish sauce, which also has a lot of salt in it, so be mindful of that. But once the fish cooks in this, I don't like to adjust the broth that much because I don't like to disturb the fish. As it cooks, it gets kind of flaky and fall aparty, and I want to maintain the integrity of the shape of that fish as long as I can. Okay, that's very good. Now I'm going to add the fish. And you just kind of nestle it in there. And you'll notice as you add pieces, the volume will come up, so it's not like you need to add more liquid or anything. And you don't need to cover it. A lot of people wanted to know, should this be covered? I don't know where any of the lids to any of my skillets are. If you do, good for you. I have no idea where mine are. So I try not to require a lid for something like this, but if I did, I would add the lid, maybe, or you can also use a sheet pan. That's something that I've done before. And so just to kind of get this liquid a little more above, and these, again, are thicker pieces of fish. It looks really nice. I would eat this. I'm going to eat this, actually. You can kind of like baste it a little bit. And I am going to cover this just because I have this lid here. But if I wasn't going to cover it, you could also just flip the fish. It's going to take like 2 seconds. Good, because I only have 2 minutes. I cannot believe I filled the time. Yes, I can. I can't believe it. I was like, I'll talk forever if you want me to. They're like, no thanks, we're good. And for herbs, finishing this, I like to finish pretty much everything with herbs. I feel like they make a world a better place. They make your food more delicious. And I treat them almost like I do salad greens or anything else leafy. I don't love chopping herbs because I'm lazy, but I also really enjoy the process and the visual of eating leafy stemmed herbs. So when I'm picking cilantro or something like that, I'm leaving it pretty whole. And then for something like mint, I will take off the leaves just because the stems are not super delicious. But my whole thing is like, if it's on your plate of food, you should be able to eat it. So people ask me often if the herbs are garnish or if they are part of the dish. And I'm like, what? Because it wouldn't occur to me to put anything on my food that I wasn't planning on eating. But I am also like a goat, and I eat everything. I eat raw pie dough, I eat the shells of shrimp, sometimes of peanuts. I do it all. So I feel like I'm constantly in a game of, can I eat it with myself? And you can eat it, is mostly always the answer. A nice thing also about this dish is a lot of people have been making it when they're having people over because, especially if it's like 4 of you. You can kind of serve it with or around or toast adjacent, but people have been serving it with tortillas or with rice or with couscous or with another grain. You can also serve this with pasta because it's almost like has like a thickish bouillabaisse-y vibe. And you can just serve it kind of with like plain olive oil linguine or something like that. Pretend you're in the coast of Italy or something. I don't know. Never been. Okay. I think the number one question when cooking fish is, how do I know that it's done? And most fish will go from a kind of pinkish, translucent color or look, and then to a solid white, opaque look. And so we're almost there. And because we're cooking this fish in a broth, it's really, really hard to overcook it. So when in doubt, you can give it a few more minutes, but it should take no more than 6 minutes, even on the thicker side. For thinner fillets, you're looking at like a 4-minute cook time, which is really nice. Especially, this dish came together in 30 minutes, especially when you consider how long it took me to peel that garlic. I feel like that was most of the time. Cool. So these are really nice, and they're holding together, and very pleased. And so to serve this, you take the fish. Each person gets a little piece. I have done this with 2 larger fillets as well for like, if I'm not really sure how many people are coming over. And then you can kind of just break it up with your fish spatula. They don't have to be pre-portioned. It's just a nice way of knowing how much food how many portions you have going into it. And then you can spoon your broth around it. It's not a soup. It's like more than a soup or more than a sauce, less than a soup, or something like that. It's a real in-between. But you want to make sure that you kind of have equal parts of those pieces of tomato and also the broth for which to eat it in. Sometimes what I'll do too is I'll just stick the piece of bread in the bowl and then serve everything on top if you're into like the crunchy gonzagi vibe, which I am. And then they all get these little crispy shallots and pieces of garlic. It also gets served with lime, which I forgot. Hi. Hi, how's it going? And this is just for added acidity, which is especially helpful if you're working with tomatoes that are not super peak season. Lemon also works, but I really like the flavor of lime. Lime, to me, has a sort of flavor, whereas lemon is just kind of floral and acidic. So yeah, that is the tomato poached fish with chili oil and herbs. And then drizzle on top. Great. Do I get to eat this now? Oh, I don't know. What am I? I was like, what do I do now? Thank you guys so much for coming. I'm going to be back at 3 to do a chicken dish for my new cookbook, Nothing Fancy, which comes out in 2 weeks. Very excited. And I'll see you all then. Thanks for coming.
Thank you all for coming. Please come back at 2 o'clock for Fresh and Flavorful with Chef Coleman Teitelbaum and Chef Joel Chesbro.